Get your ghetto picnic off our beach before I call the real police. Beatrice Langford's manicured finger jabbed toward Zora Coleman's simple red sundress and denim shorts, her voice carrying across the pristine sand like she owned the very air. Her husband Bradley stood behind her in his orange polo shirt and khaki shorts, arms crossed, while their teenage son filmed on his phone, laughing. "This is a private beach, honey. People like you need to stick to the public dumps down the coast." The family had no idea they were trying to evict the woman who held the deed to every grain of sand they were standing on, and whose signature could make their $1,000,000 beachfront dream disappear with a single phone call. Welcome to Frost Folktales. This is where we tell the stories of those who were underestimated, dismissed, and targeted, yet chose courage over silence. If these stories move you, subscribe and be part of a community that refuses to let them fade into the background. As Zora Coleman looked up from her simple beach chair at the brightly lit beach, shadows were harshly cast from the morning sun, and her book was still in her lap. As the waves crashed against the shore, she enjoyed this moment so much that it made owning beach property worthwhile. The interruption was the sound of designer flip-flops slapping aggressively across the sand, announcing the arrival of trouble in a red designer beachwear. Beatrice Langford stood over her like a monument to entitlement, her perfectly styled blonde hair catching the sunlight as her lips twisted into a sneer of disgust. Behind her, Bradley Langford adjusted his orange polo shirt and crossed his arms, presenting a united front of assumed authority. Their teenage son Marcus held his phone at the perfect angle to capture what he clearly expected to be entertainment. "I'm sorry. Was there something you needed?" Zora's voice remained calm and measured, her dark eyes meeting Beatrice's hostile glare without flinching. She carefully marked her place in her book and set it aside, her movements deliberate and unhurried. "What I need is for you to pack up whatever discount store beach gear you dragged out here and find somewhere appropriate for your kind to spend the day." Beatrice's voice carried the practiced authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "This is an exclusive area. We pay premium prices to keep it that way." As Zora sat modestly on the beach, Marcus was snickering behind his phone camera. "Hey, Mom will go viral with this one." This woman walked in without knowing what to expect. The salt air was tense as Zora rose slowly from her chair. A red sundress floated in the warm summer wind. She carried herself with a quiet dignity, arms straightened out confidently, despite the fact that 3 people were positioned in front of her, clearly there to intimidate her. She stood strong. "I understand you might be confused about the access rights here, but I can assure you that I have every right to be on this beach." Zora's words were carefully chosen, each syllable delivered with the precision of someone who understood exactly where they stood legally. "Confused?" Beatrice's laugh was sharp and mocking. "Honey, the only one confused here is you if you think you belong anywhere near this property. We've been coming to this beach for 15 years. Our lease agreement specifically guarantees exclusive access to this entire stretch of coastline." Bradley stepped forward, his khaki shorts and orange polo, giving him the appearance of someone trying too hard to look casual while wielding power. "My wife is being generous by giving you a chance to leave quietly. Most people in your situation would have figured out they didn't belong here the moment they saw the private property signs." The threat was an unmistakable fact, and literally toxic like smoke. Zora's jaw tensed ever so slightly but stayed composed. She had heard this particular type of educated racism before, which is to say the message concealed behind legalese and property values but hasn't changed in many centuries of American history. "I am grateful for your attempt at property rights. I am very familiar with it myself, actually." Zora's reply hit home to Bradley at some hidden level, but he couldn't pinpoint what had changed in their exchange as he tried to analyze it. Marcus lowered his phone slightly, his teenage attention span caught by something unexpected in the exchange. "Wait, Mom, did you hear how she just talked to Dad? She's not acting like she's scared or anything. Some don't know their place until taught a lesson. As Beatrice increased her volume, she waved about her designer jewels that twinkled in the light. "No need to worry, little one. Mommy has everything under control here." The threat was now made explicit. In the morning sunlight, it certainly stood naked and ugly, the intention clear. Zora felt the familiar surge of anger that arose every time she was treated like a problem to be dealt with, an issue to be managed by people who never questioned whether they had the right to manage anyone. "A misunderstanding has occurred, Mrs. Langford, as you do not actually own the property in question. Is it possible to discuss this more kindly?" Zora tried a diplomatic gesture, but it backfired with a laugh that sent seagulls scattering from the rocks. "Civilly? With someone trespassing on private property?" Beatrice pulled her phone from her designer beach bag with theatrical flair. "I don't think so. This conversation is over. You can explain your legal theories to the police and private security." The sight of that phone being brandished like a weapon sent a chill through the morning air that had nothing to do with the ocean breeze. For generations, that particular threat had carried weight that extended far beyond simple law enforcement. It was the nuclear option of racial confrontation, the moment when disagreement transformed into potential danger. "You're really going to call the police because I'm reading a book on the beach?" Zora's question cut through the absurdity of the situation, highlighting the stark contrast between her peaceful presence and their aggressive response. "I'm calling the police because you're trespassing on private property after being asked to leave multiple times." Beatrice began dialing, her movements sharp and decisive. "And I'm calling our security company because people like you sometimes don't understand instructions until they're properly motivated." Bradley nodded enthusiastically. Clad in an orange polo shirt, he resembled some suburban warrior suited up for battle. "We have previously handled this type of situation. There is a whole group of individuals who think it is fine to help themselves to things they have not paid for." Marcus resumed filming, his phone capturing his mother's performance for an audience that would never see the full context. "This is so going on my story. Watch my mom handle some random lady trying to crash our private beach." But something about Zora was still off if you paid close attention. There was no fear, no anger, no clamoring of helplessness in the moment, but there was only a certainty in calm. Beatrice's dialing took a while, and she noted it like a teacher watching her pupil finish demonstrating ignorance before being corrected. "I understand you feel strongly about property rights, Mrs. Langford. I respect that. It's actually quite important to know exactly who owns what and who has the authority to grant access." Zora's words carried undertones that Bradley almost caught, something that made him glance at his wife with the first flicker of uncertainty. "Yes, this is Beatrice Langford, calling from the Crescent Bay private beach access. We have a trespassing situation that requires immediate police response. The woman in question has been asked to leave multiple times and is refusing to comply with private property restrictions." As Beatrice spoke into her phone, delivering her version of events with the confidence of someone accustomed to being believed without question, Zora remained perfectly still. Her red sundress moved gently in the ocean breeze, her denim shorts and simple sandals presenting a stark contrast to the designer warfare being waged against her presence. The sun was steadily climbing when the situation began to escalate. The incident was now attracting attention from other beachgoers, some of whom were not taking their morning walk and were watching from a distance. The clean sand, so peaceful a moment before, had become the stage for a fight that was seemingly just like thousands of others before. "Yes, officer, I'll be right here waiting. And please hurry." These situations can escalate quickly when people don't respect property boundaries. Beatrice ended her call with the satisfaction of someone who had just activated the machinery of institutional power on her behalf. Marcus smiled at the screen of his phone. "This woman has no idea what's coming her way, bro. Mom doesn't play when it comes to folks disrespecting our family." But Zora's mysterious calm persisted. even as the threat of police involvement loomed over the encounter. She stood on the sand like someone with nowhere else to be, no urgent need to escape before authorities arrived. Her confidence seemed to emanate from some knowledge that the Langford family couldn't access, some understanding of the situation that remained hidden beneath the surface of their assumptions. The waves still crashed on as the drama unfolded above the tide line. After a short while, the wailing of sirens would also contribute their voice. Soon a showdown would begin that none of the people involved understood in the slightest. While they waited for police officers to arrive, the four people stood in a tableau that encapsulated something important about power, privilege, and about the dangerous assumptions people make about who belongs where. The morning sun shone down on all of them equally, but their shadows fell in remarkably different directions. The whine of a police siren echoed from afar as it approached the white sandy beach. Zora Coleman's bright red sundress and denim shorts sat heavily against the towel on the beach. Beatrice Langford, meanwhile, paced around in a designer red beachwear near the water's edge. Bradley Langford nervously adjusted his orange polo shirt while watching the police cruiser pull into the parking area for one of the beach accesses. And Marcus was still shooting tape with his phone, thinking it would be Zora getting a humiliating removal. Officer Derek Hayes stepped out of his vehicle. He had on his regulation blue uniform with short sleeves in the natural light. The man, appearing to be in his mid-30s, was distinctly calm as he walked towards the group that had started to form around the scene of the drama. Beachgoers seemed to have halted their morning activities to watch. Meanwhile, a few nearby business owners had come out to see what was clearly becoming an incident. Beatrice Langford dashed toward Officer Derek Hayes, a dramatic pang in her voice. "Officer, thank God you are here. This woman is trespassing on our private beach property and refuses to leave. We've asked her to leave multiple times, and she has gotten rude and confrontational. We feel threatened by her," she said, pointing toward Zora Coleman. Zora Coleman remained calm and composed, simply looking at the officer as he walked toward her with quiet dignity. Bradley Langford stepped forward to support his wife's narrative. "We've been members of this exclusive beachfront community for over 15 years, Officer Hayes. We pay substantial fees for the privacy and security of this area, and this individual has no right to be here. She's clearly not one of our residents or authorized guests." Officer Derek Hayes nodded professionally, pulling out his notepad. "I understand your concerns. Let me assess the situation properly and speak with all parties involved." His tone was measured and official, though his eyes briefly registered the obvious tension in the air. At that moment, Calvin Brooks arrived on the scene, wearing his beige security uniform with the beachfront resort logo prominently displayed. He was a tall, lean man in his 40s who moved with the practiced authority of someone accustomed to handling property disputes. "Officer Hayes, I'm Calvin Brooks, head of security for the Ocean View Resort and Beach Club. I can confirm that this woman is not an authorized guest or resident of our facility. Our policy is very clear about exclusive access rights for paying members and their approved visitors." Fiona O'Brien, owner of the nearby Seaside Cafe, left her restaurant in a red uniform with white apron and a troubled expression as she watched events unfold. For 12 years, she served the local community and saw how people, especially colored people, were often discriminated against for enjoying the beaches and coast area. The arrival of her person, amidst the ever-growing crowd of spectators, changed the scene. Beatrice Langford seized upon Calvin Brooks's arrival as validation of her position. "You see, Officer Hayes, even resort security confirms that this woman has no business being here. She's clearly trying to take advantage of facilities and amenities that she hasn't paid for, and her attitude has been completely inappropriate when we tried to explain the situation to her politely." Zora Coleman stood gracefully, her movement fluid and confident despite the mounting pressure from multiple authority figures. "Good morning, Officer Hayes. I appreciate you responding to address this situation. I have identification and relevant documentation that I believe will clarify the legal aspects of this matter." She reached into her beach bag, retrieving a leather portfolio with calm precision. Officer Derek Hayes walked up to Zora Coleman. He was trained to be professional and balanced. "Ma'am, I'll need to see your identification and your side of the story. Mrs. Langford has made a complaint of trespassing, and I will need to examine all facets of the response." Beatrice Langford immediately objected to any private conversation. "Officer Hayes, whatever she has to say can be said publicly, in front of all of us. I don't want her spinning some elaborate story to try to justify her obvious violation of our property rights. We deserve to hear whatever excuse she's planning to make for her inappropriate behavior." The beachgoers and the local business owners continued to gather in crowds as more witnesses arrived to witness the event. People were whispering among themselves. Some were clearly uncomfortable at the aggressive tone directed towards Zora Coleman, while others were curious about the outcome. The morning sun illuminated everything so well that it was impossible for anyone to miss what was happening. Fiona O'Brien stepped forward. She carries the local weight of someone who has settled here long term. "I would like to inform you, Officer Hayes, that I am watching the whole situation from my restaurant, and I want you to know that the lady here has been ever peaceful and respectful, and that the Langford family is getting increasingly hostile and aggressive towards her, without any reason other than assuming that she doesn't belong here." Calvin Brooks, an employee of the combination scandal victimized, feels pressure to support the family. "I must emphasize, Officer Hayes, we have a strict policy here at the resort about access to some private beach areas. The Langford family is premium members, but they have some expected exclusivity in return for payment. This is a clear violation of their access entitlement." By talking about their ties to the community, Bradley Langford tried to bolster their position. "Officer Hayes, I believe you understand we are not trying to be difficult, but we have friends in local politics and leadership reflecting our thoughts on whether the security and exclusivity of this area are maintained. I trust you will take it seriously." Zora Coleman remained composed throughout the mounting pressure, her confidence seemingly unshaken by the institutional forces aligning against her. "Officer Hayes, I completely understand the need for thorough investigation of property rights and access authorization. I have documentation that directly addresses these concerns, and I believe a brief private conversation would be the most efficient way to review the relevant legal details." Marcus Langford continued filming, confident that he was documenting what would become a viral video of someone being justly removed from property where they didn't belong. "This is going to be amazing content," he whispered to his friend who had joined the crowd. "Mom and Dad are totally going to get this woman arrested for trespassing. She picked the wrong family to mess with." Officer Derek Hayes surveyed the growing crowd and the escalating tension, recognizing that the situation required careful handling to prevent further confrontation. "I need everyone to remain calm while I conduct this investigation properly. Mrs. Langford, I've heard your complaint clearly. Ma'am, I'd like to review your identification and documentation to understand the complete picture of this situation." Beatrice Langford's frustration intensified as she realized that Officer Derek Hayes was not immediately proceeding with Zora Coleman's removal. "Officer Hayes, I don't understand why this is becoming so complicated. We have a clear case of trespassing on private property, confirmed by resort security, and this woman should be removed immediately. Every minute of delay just encourages this kind of inappropriate behavior." Fiona O'Brien found she was not alone in her distress, with many other local business owners had been a witness to this over the years. "Officer Hayes, I think you should know that this isn't the family's first time aggressively confronting people of color who were peacefully using the beach. You need to recognize that this is just one instance of the confrontations that they have instigated." Calvin Brooks shifted uncomfortably as the situation became more complex than a simple trespassing call. His years of experience in security had taught him to recognize when situations might not be as straightforward as they initially appeared, and something about Zora Coleman's calm confidence suggested there were elements he didn't understand. Zora Coleman opened her leather portfolio, revealing business cards and official-looking documents that caught Officer Derek Hayes' attention. Officer Hayes, I believe these materials will provide essential context for understanding the legal framework governing access rights to this coastal area. I'm confident that a brief review will clarify any confusion about authorization and property boundaries. The morning sun continued to shine brightly overhead, illuminating the scene as tensions reached a critical point. Beachgoers watched nervously as the confrontation appeared to be approaching a decisive moment, while local business owners like Fiona O'Brien prepared to serve as witnesses to whatever resolution would emerge from Officer Derek Hayes' investigation. Beatrice Langford could tell her anticipated quick victory was turning into something more complicated than expected. I assure you that the lady is a fraud, and if she has any documentation, then I want it to be reviewed in public, where we can see it and verify it. I won't let her manipulate the situation with private conversations and secret papers that have no relevance to this case. Officer Derek Hayes realized that the situation required more careful investigation than a typical trespassing complaint, particularly given the community attention and the confident demeanor of all parties involved. The morning air hummed with tension as multiple institutional pressures converged on a single moment that would determine the direction of events, while Zora Coleman's mysterious confidence suggested that dramatic revelations lay ahead. Officer Derek Hayes glanced around at the growing crowd of onlookers, then motioned for Zora Coleman to step aside. Ma'am, if you have documentation regarding this property, I'd like to see it privately before we proceed further. Beatrice Langford's red designer cover-up fluttered as she stepped forward aggressively. Absolutely not. Whatever lies she's planning to tell you, we have a right to hear them. This is our private beach, and I demand transparency in how you handle this trespasser. Mrs. Langford, please allow me to do my job, Officer Hayes replied firmly, his short-sleeved blue uniform catching the afternoon sunlight. Standard procedure requires me to examine any legal documents presented by involved parties. Zora Coleman reached into her red canvas beach bag, producing a leather portfolio. Officer Hayes, I understand the confusion, but I believe these documents will clarify the actual legal situation here. Her voice remained calm despite the tension crackling through the salt air. As they stepped a few yards away from the Langford family, Zora opened the portfolio. Officer Hayes' expression shifted dramatically as he examined the business cards and preliminary legal documents, identifying her as principal of Coleman Coastal Development. His shoulders straightened, and he looked up at her with newfound respect. Ma'am, this changes things significantly. Coleman Coastal Development owns several major properties along this coastline, correct? That's right, officer. And I believe you'll find that the property we're currently standing on falls under our management umbrella. Zora's confidence wasn't arrogance. It was the quiet certainty of someone who knew exactly where they stood legally. Beatrice Langford's voice rose to a near shriek. What are you two discussing over there? I demand to know what kind of fabricated documents she's showing you. Derek, your department knows our family. We've contributed significantly to the Police Benevolent Fund. Bradley Langford, his orange polo shirt now damp with perspiration, placed a restraining hand on his wife's arm. Beatrice, let the officer handle this professionally. I'm sure there's simply been some misunderstanding about property boundaries. Marcus continued filming with his phone, completely oblivious to the shifting dynamics around him. This is so going viral, he muttered to himself. Rich family versus trespasser showdown. My followers are going to eat this up. Officer Hayes returned to the main group, his demeanor noticeably more measured. I'm going to need to verify some information before we proceed. Mrs. Langford, while I understand your concerns, I need to examine all relevant documentation before making any determinations about property rights. Property rights. Beatrice's face flushed red beneath her wide-brimmed sun hat. Officer Hayes, I'm calling Captain Pearson immediately. This is absolutely ridiculous. We've had exclusive access to this beach for over a decade. Our lease agreement clearly states— Your lease agreement? Zora interjected quietly. That's interesting. Lease agreements typically involve a property owner or management company. Who exactly do you lease this beach access from? The question hung in the air like morning fog. And for the first time, Beatrice Langford seemed momentarily speechless. Bradley stepped forward, his khaki shorts wrinkled from the stress. Well, that's handled through our attorneys and the Coastal Development Management Company. We don't deal with those details personally. A sleek black sedan pulled into the small parking area behind the dunes. Zora smiled as she recognized the vehicle. That would be my assistant with the comprehensive documentation. Natalie Foster emerged from the sedan, her professional appearance striking against the casual beach setting. Her orange blazer and blue skirt suggested serious business, and she carried a large leather briefcase that commanded attention. Her heels clicked against the wooden walkway as she approached the group with purposeful strides. Ms. Coleman, I have all the requested documentation, Natalie announced professionally. Property deeds, lease agreements, zoning permits, and environmental compliance certificates for the entire coastal development project. Beatrice Langford's eyes widened with growing alarm. Who is this person? What documentation? Officer Hayes, I demand to know what kind of elaborate scam is being perpetrated here. Ma'am, I'm Natalie Foster, administrative assistant to Miss Zora Coleman of Coleman Coastal Development. Natalie's voice carried the crisp efficiency of someone accustomed to dealing with complex legal situations. I understand there's been some confusion about property access rights. Officer Hayes accepted the briefcase and began examining its contents. Property deeds, official letterhead, county stamps, and legal seals created an impressive array of legitimate documentation. His expression grew increasingly serious as he reviewed each document. Meanwhile, a small crowd had gathered near Fiona O'Brien's beachside restaurant. Fiona, wearing her red uniform apron over casual clothes, pointed toward the confrontation. Look, isn't that Zora Coleman? She's the developer who's been investing in our community projects. That's definitely her, confirmed Miguel Santos, who managed the local surf shop. Coleman Coastal Development just partnered with us for the new environmental education program. She's been amazing for local business. Wait, added Sarah Kim, who ran the organic market nearby. If that's Zora Coleman, then she probably owns half the coastline around here. What are the Langfords doing confronting her on her own property? Fiona O'Brien began walking toward the confrontation, her concern evident. As a longtime local business owner, she had witnessed the Langford family's entitled behavior toward diverse beachgoers for years. This situation looked like it might finally provide an opportunity for accountability. Excuse me, Fiona called out as she approached. Officer Hayes, I'm Fiona O'Brien. I own the Coastal Cafe. I couldn't help but notice the commotion, and I wanted to offer witness testimony if needed. Beatrice Langford whirled around, her red cover-up billowing dramatically. This doesn't concern you, Fiona. This is a private matter involving our family's exclusive beach access. Actually, Mrs. Langford, I think it concerns the entire community, Fiona replied steadily, especially if there are questions about public access rights and how people are being treated on what might be community property. Officer Hayes looked up from the documentation, his expression grave. I'm going to need to contact my supervisor. This situation involves complex property law that requires higher-level review. Another patrol car arrived, and Captain Louise Pearson stepped out wearing her blue long-sleeve uniform. Her presence immediately commanded respect from everyone present. Years of experience had taught her to assess complex situations quickly, and her sharp eyes took in the assembled crowd, the documentation, and the obvious tension between the parties. Officer Hayes, what's the situation here? Captain Pearson's voice carried authority without aggression. Captain, we have a property dispute involving questions about beach access rights, lease agreements, and potential civil rights issues. The documentation is complex, and I believe this requires supervisory review. Natalie Foster opened a small recording device. Captain Pearson, with your permission, I'd like to document this interaction for potential legal proceedings. We have concerns about discriminatory behavior and false claims of property authority. You cannot record us without permission. Bradley Langford protested, his orange polo now visibly stained with perspiration. Actually, sir, this appears to be a public beach area, and documentation of potential civil rights violations is legally protected, Captain Pearson replied. Ma'am, you may continue recording, but please announce when recording begins and ends. Beatrice Langford's confidence began cracking like paint in harsh sunlight. Captain Pearson, your department knows our family. We've been substantial contributors to community safety initiatives. I'm sure this misunderstanding can be resolved quickly and quietly. Mrs. Langford, all citizens receive equal treatment under the law, regardless of their community contributions, Captain Pearson responded firmly. I need to review all documentation and witness statements before making any determinations. Marcus finally looked up from his phone, sensing that his entertainment was transforming into something potentially serious for his family. He quietly attempted to stop recording, but several community members had already begun filming the interaction themselves. Zora Coleman maintained her composed demeanor throughout the escalating situation. Captain Pearson, I appreciate your professionalism. I believe a thorough review of the documentation will clarify everyone's legal rights and responsibilities regarding this property. Natalie Foster began organizing the comprehensive legal portfolio for Captain Pearson's review. Property deeds dating back 5 years, lease agreements with specific termination clauses, environmental impact studies, and county approval documents created an impressive display of legitimate legal authority. This is impossible, Beatrice muttered, her voice losing its earlier commanding tone. There must be some mistake. Our attorneys assured us that our lease agreement provided exclusive access rights. Exclusive access rights to property owned by Coleman Coastal Development? Zora asked quietly. That would be an interesting arrangement, considering I don't recall authorizing any such agreement. The implications began sinking in for the Langford family. Bradley's face paled beneath his suntan, while Marcus stared at his mother with growing comprehension that their comfortable assumptions might be dangerously wrong. Captain Pearson finished reviewing the initial documentation and looked up with a serious expression. I'm going to need all parties to remain present while we conduct a complete investigation. This situation involves potential civil rights violations, property law questions, and false reporting claims that require thorough documentation. Fiona O'Brien smiled as more community members gathered in support. Local business owners who had recognized Zora Coleman began sharing stories of her positive impact on coastal development and community investment. The shift in crowd dynamics was palpable as truth began emerging from beneath layers of entitled assumptions. Beatrice Langford looked around at the growing crowd of community supporters, the official documentation, and Captain Pearson's serious demeanor. For the first time in years, her comfortable assumptions about power, privilege, and property rights were crumbling. The private beach she had claimed as exclusively hers might belong to the very woman she had attempted to humiliate and remove. The afternoon sun continued shining brightly overhead, illuminating a confrontation that had transformed from simple trespassing complaint into complex legal investigation. Truth was emerging, and with it, the promise of justice that had been long overdue. The morning sun cast sharp shadows across the pristine sand as Natalie Foster's sleek black sedan pulled into the beach parking area. Through the passenger window, onlookers could see her orange blazer perfectly pressed over her blue skirt, a leather portfolio clutched firmly in her hands as she stepped onto the asphalt. The assembled crowd had grown larger, with beachgoers and local business owners forming a loose semicircle around the confrontation that had been building for the past hour. Captain Louise Pearson adjusted her blue long-sleeve uniform shirt and approached Natalie Foster with professional interest. "Ma'am, I understand you have documentation relevant to this property dispute." Natalie Foster nodded crisply, her expression all business. "Captain Pearson, I'm Natalie Foster, Executive Assistant to Zora Coleman of Coleman Coastal Development. I have comprehensive legal documentation that should resolve this situation immediately." She opened the leather portfolio, revealing thick stacks of official papers, property deeds, and corporate documents. Beatrice Langford pushed forward aggressively, her red designer beachwear now disheveled from the morning's confrontation. "I don't care what papers she has. This is our beach. Our family has had exclusive access for years." Her voice carried the sharp edge of someone accustomed to getting her way through sheer volume and entitled indignation. "Mrs. Langford, please step back while I review these documents," Captain Pearson instructed firmly, accepting the portfolio from Natalie Foster. The police captain's experienced eyes immediately recognized the official seals and legal formatting of legitimate property documentation. Zora Coleman remained calm beside them, her red sundress and denim shorts a stark contrast to the tension radiating from the Langford family. She watched quietly as Captain Pearson spread the documents across the hood of a patrol car, using the bright overhead sunlight to examine each page carefully. "These are property deeds for the entire coastal development," Captain Pearson announced, her voice carrying clearly across the gathered crowd. "Registered to Coleman Coastal Development Corporation, with Zora Coleman listed as principal owner and managing director." She held up a thick document with official county seals. "This shows ownership of the entire coastline from Pelican Point to Sunset Cove, including all beachfront access rights." Bradley Langford stepped forward, his orange polo shirt wrinkled with sweat. "There must be some mistake, Captain. We've had our lease agreement for 15 years. Our family has exclusive rights to this section of beach." Natalie Foster pulled out another set of documents, her movements precise and confident. "Mr. Langford, you're correct about having a lease agreement. Here it is." She handed Captain Pearson a thick contract. "Your family's beachfront access lease was issued by Coastal Properties Management, which was acquired by Coleman Coastal Development 8 months ago. All existing lease agreements were honored, but this particular lease expires in exactly 4 days. The color drained from Beatrice Langford's face as the implications became clear. "Let me see those papers," she demanded, lunging toward the documents. "This is impossible. We own this beach." "Ma'am, please maintain your distance." Officer Derek Hayes intervened, his blue short-sleeve uniform crisp in the morning light. "Captain Pearson is conducting an official review of the legal documentation." Captain Pearson continued examining the papers, her expression growing more serious. "I see zoning permits, environmental impact assessments, and development approvals all properly filed and approved by the County Planning Commission." She looked up at Beatrice Langford with newfound understanding. "Mrs. Langford, based on this documentation, you and your family are currently guests on property owned by Miss Coleman's development company." Marcus Langford, who had been filming the confrontation on his phone for social media entertainment, suddenly realized the shifting dynamics. His fingers moved frantically across his screen, attempting to delete the footage that now captured his family's racist assumptions and aggressive behavior toward the actual property owner. "Delete that footage all you want, son," Fiona O'Brien called out from the crowd, her red restaurant uniform bright in the sunlight. "Half the people here were recording too." The local restaurant owner stepped forward, her Irish accent thick with righteous anger. "Captain Pearson, I own O'Brien's Seafood just up the beach, and I need to tell you something important about this family's behavior." Captain Pearson looked up from the documents. "Go ahead, Ms. O'Brien. The Langfords have been harassing Black and Latino families on this beach for years," Fiona O'Brien declared, her voice carrying across the sand. "They've called security on children building sandcastles, complained about families having barbecues, and demanded that my restaurant stop serving customers they claimed didn't belong here. I've seen Beatrice Langford personally confront at least a dozen families, always minorities, always claiming they were trespassing on her private beach. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd as other local business owners nodded in recognition. Several beachgoers pulled out their phones, some beginning to record the unfolding drama. Calvin Brooks, the resort security guard, shifted uncomfortably in his uniform. Captain Pearson noticed his nervous demeanor and addressed him directly. "Mr. Brooks, I understand you've been enforcing beach access policies. What's the basis for those policies?" Calvin Brooks looked between the Langford family and the legal documents spread across the patrol car hood. "Captain, I have to be honest. The resort's policy was based entirely on the Langford family's claims about exclusive access rights. We never actually verified the legal documentation. Mrs. Langford told us they owned this section of beach, and we took her word for it." "So you've been removing families from this beach based solely on the Langfords' verbal claims?" Captain Pearson pressed. "Yes, ma'am," Calvin Brooks admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mrs. Langford would call the resort front desk whenever she saw families she didn't approve of, and we would ask them to leave. I always felt uncomfortable about it, but I was told it was company policy." Beatrice Langford's composure completely shattered. "This is ridiculous. I don't care what those papers say. Our family has invested millions in this community. We deserve exclusive access. We can't have just anyone using our beach." "It's not your beach," Natalie Foster stated coldly, producing another document. "According to the lease agreement your family signed, you were granted limited recreational access rights, not ownership. The lease explicitly states that the property owner retains all legal authority over beach access policies." Officer Derek Hayes had been taking detailed notes throughout the confrontation. "Captain, I need to report that Mrs. Langford made several discriminatory statements during the initial confrontation. She assumed Mrs. Coleman was trespassing based on her race and made multiple references to people who belong here and those who don't." The sound of another vehicle approaching drew everyone's attention. A red Honda Civic pulled into the parking area, and Rosa Delgado emerged, wearing a red jacket over black pants. The community activists' arrival seemed to energize the crowd, and several people called out greetings. "I got calls from 3 different people about what was happening here," Rosa Delgado announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to fighting injustice. "Captain Pearson, I represent the Coastal Community Rights Coalition, and we've been documented discriminatory practices at beach access points throughout the county." Rosa Delgado opened her own folder, producing photographs and written statements. "Mrs. Langford, we have documented evidence of your family's pattern of harassment toward Black and Latino beachgoers. Here are statements from 12 different families who were confronted, harassed, or had police called on them by your family over the past 2 years." She handed Captain Pearson a thick stack of papers. Each statement described similar incidents: families enjoying peaceful beach days who were accused of trespassing, told they didn't belong, or had security called to remove them. All of these families were legally entitled to beach access, but your family used intimidation and false claims of ownership to drive them away. Beatrice Langford's face flushed red as she realized the scope of documentation building against her family. Those people were causing problems. They were too loud, too messy. They didn't respect our privacy. "Ma'am, you just admitted to discriminatory enforcement," Captain Pearson noted, adding to her official report. "You've acknowledged targeting specific families based on subjective complaints about noise and behavior that you don't apply equally to all beachgoers." Bradley Langford attempted damage control, pulling out his phone. "Captain, surely we can resolve this through proper legal channels. Let me contact our attorney to discuss lease renewal options with Ms. Coleman's company." "Mr. Langford, your lease renewal is a separate civil matter," Captain Pearson replied. "Right now, I'm investigating potential civil rights violations and false reporting. Your wife called police claiming Ms. Coleman was trespassing on your property. Based on this documentation, Ms. Coleman has legal authority to be anywhere on this beach, while your family's access rights expire in 4 days. Zora Coleman finally spoke, her voice calm but carrying unmistakable authority. Captain Pearson, I want to make it clear that Coleman Coastal Development is committed to equal access policies. This beach will be open to all families regardless of race, ethnicity, or economic background. We're implementing environmental protection measures and educational programs, but access will never be restricted based on discriminatory preferences. The crowd responded with spontaneous applause, and several families cheered openly. Children who had been watching nervously began smiling, sensing that the adults had resolved whatever conflict had been building. Natalie Foster produced one final document. Captain, this is the official notice of lease termination that will be served to the Langford family. Given the documented pattern of discriminatory behavior and misrepresentation of property rights, Coleman Coastal Development is exercising its right to terminate the lease agreement, effective immediately upon expiration. Beatrice Langford's entitled demands had completely shifted to desperate panic. You can't do this. We'll sue. We have connections in the county government. This beach will be worthless without families like ours. Mrs. Langford, Captain Pearson said firmly, based on the evidence presented and witness testimony, I'm beginning an official investigation into civil rights violations and filing false police reports. I strongly advise you to contact your attorney and cease any further confrontational behavior. The morning sun climbed higher as the legal documentation completely demolished every assumption the Langford family had made about their power and authority over the beach that had never actually belonged to them. The morning sun cast long shadows across the beach as more people began to gather around the unfolding confrontation. What had started as a private dispute between Zora Coleman and the Langford family was rapidly becoming a community moment of reckoning. Captain Louise Pearson surveyed the growing crowd with the experienced eye of someone who understood when a situation was about to shift from individual conflict to something much larger. Fiona O'Brien stepped forward first, her red restaurant uniform catching the bright overhead light. She had been watching from her beachside cafe, but the legal documentation Natalie Foster had presented gave her the courage she had been seeking for months. Captain Pearson, I need to tell you something about this family, Fiona said, gesturing toward the Langfords. Her Irish accent carried clearly across the beach as other community members moved closer. This isn't the first time they've tried to exclude people from this beach. Not by a long shot. Beatrice Langford whirled around, her red designer swimwear now looking less elegant and more desperate in the harsh morning light. That woman is lying. She's just trying to protect her business interests. Let her speak, Captain Pearson said firmly, her blue long-sleeve uniform lending official weight to her words. She pulled out a notepad while Natalie Foster positioned herself to record the testimony on her phone. Fiona took a deep breath before continuing. 3 weeks ago, I watched Mrs. Langford approach a Latino family who was having a picnic right over there. She pointed to a spot near the water's edge. She told them this was private property and that they needed to leave immediately. The father tried to explain they had checked with the tourism office, but she threatened to call security. That's completely different, Beatrice protested, but Captain Pearson held up a hand for silence. What happened to the family? Officer Derek Hayes asked, his short-sleeved blue uniform already showing sweat stains from the growing tension. They left, Fiona said sadly. The children were crying, and the parents were embarrassed. I wanted to say something, but I was afraid of causing trouble for my restaurant. The Langfords have influence in this community, and I couldn't afford to lose customers. Rosa Delgado emerged from the crowd, her red jacket bright against the white sand. As a community activist, she had been documenting discriminatory incidents throughout the coastal area for over a year. Fiona's testimony matches multiple reports I've received, she said, approaching Captain Pearson. I have detailed documentation of at least 12 separate incidents where Mrs. Langford has approached Black and Latino beachgoers, claiming authority to remove them from public spaces. Bradley Langford stepped forward, his orange polo shirt now wrinkled from the morning's stress. Those were simple misunderstandings. We were trying to help people understand the local regulations. Help? Rosa's voice carried righteous anger as she opened a folder she had retrieved from her car. Let me read you some direct quotes I've collected. Mrs. Langford told a black father with his 2 young daughters, "This beach isn't for people like you. There are public beaches where you'll be more comfortable." She told a group of Latino teenagers, "This is a family area. You need to find somewhere else to hang out." Marcus Langford, who had been quietly trying to delete videos from his phone, looked up with growing horror. Several of his peers from school had arrived at the beach, drawn by social media posts about the confrontation. They were recording everything, and his discriminatory behavior was becoming viral content in real time. Calvin Brooks, the security guard who had initially supported the Langford family's claims, stepped forward reluctantly. His standard security uniform seemed to weigh heavily on his shoulders as he faced Captain Pearson. "I need to admit something," he said quietly. "Mrs. One of Matewan Langford has been pressuring resort security to support her claims about exclusive beach access, even though we never had legal documentation proving those claims." Beatrice Langford's face went pale beneath her expensive sunscreen. "Calvin, you're making a serious mistake. We've had an understanding about beach security for over 2 years. That's exactly the problem," Calvin continued, his voice growing stronger. "The understanding was based on your family's claims, not on legal verification. You told us you had exclusive rights, and we believed you. But when we asked to see documentation, you always said it was being handled by your attorneys." Captain Pearson made detailed notes, while Natalie Foster continued recording. The systematic nature of the discrimination was becoming undeniably clear. A small group of local business owners approached, led by an elderly man in a blue jacket. "Captain, I own the surf shop 3 blocks down," he said. "Mrs. Langford has come into my store multiple times, warning me not to rent equipment to certain customers because they weren't welcome on her beach." "That's a lie," Beatrice shrieked. But her desperation was becoming obvious to everyone present. "She specifically told me not to rent to black families," the shop owner continued. "She said it would create problems and that I could lose access to beachfront advertising opportunities if I didn't cooperate." A woman in an orange top and blue jacket stepped forward next. "I run the beach umbrella rental service," she said. "Mrs. Langford told my employees that certain customers should be directed to public beaches further south. She said this area needed to maintain its family atmosphere and that diverse groups would make other customers uncomfortable." Officer Derek Hayes looked at Captain Pearson with growing concern. "This is looking like a systematic pattern of civil rights violations." "It's becoming very clear," Captain Pearson agreed, continuing to document each testimony carefully. Elliot Marsh jogged across the sand, his green shirt and blue jacket identifying him as a reporter from the local news station. He had received tips about the confrontation through social media and recognized the significance of what was unfolding. "Captain Pearson, I'm Elliot Marsh from Channel 7 News. Are you investigating civil rights violations?" "We're documenting community testimony about discriminatory practices," Captain Pearson replied professionally. Elliot immediately began setting up his camera while calling his news director. This story was bigger than a simple property dispute, and he recognized the community importance of documenting the systematic discrimination. Bradley Langford pulled out his phone, frantically calling lawyers while trying to distance himself from his wife's increasingly desperate attempts to discredit the growing number of witnesses. "All of these people are lying," Beatrice shouted. "They're coordinating their stories to attack our family." Fiona O'Brien shook her head sadly. "Mrs. Langford, I've served your family at my restaurant for 3 years. I've watched you complain about diverse customers, demand tables away from certain families, and make racist comments about other guests. This isn't about attacking your family. This is about accountability for harmful behavior. More community members stepped forward with similar accounts. A young woman in red clothing described being told by Beatrice Langford that she needed to cover up more appropriately for the family beach environment, while white women in similar swimwear faced no such demands. A middle-aged man in an orange top recounted being questioned about his presence and asked to show identification, while white beachgoers were never approached. Rosa Delgado coordinated the testimony, ensuring Captain Pearson received comprehensive documentation of the discrimination pattern. This systematic exclusion has affected dozens of families over the past 2 years, she explained. People stopped coming to this area because they felt unwelcome and harassed. Natalie Foster continued recording while taking detailed notes. As Zora Coleman's assistant, she understood the legal implications of the testimony and was building a comprehensive case file. Marcus Langford watched his social media followers react with horror and disgust to videos of his family's behavior. Several classmates approached him directly. "Marcus, this is seriously messed up," one said. "How could your family treat people like this?" "We never meant," Marcus started, but he realized there was no defense for the systematic discrimination his family had practiced. Captain Pearson addressed the growing crowd. "I want to make sure everyone understands that we're taking these allegations very seriously. Systematic discrimination and violations of civil rights are serious criminal matters." Zora Coleman, who had remained quietly observant during the community testimony, finally stepped forward. Her red sundress and denim shorts made her appear approachable as she addressed the gathered community members. "I want everyone to understand why this matters so much," she began, her voice carrying clearly across the beach. "This beautiful coastal area should be a place where every family can create memories, where every child can learn about marine life, where every person can find peace and recreation regardless of their background." The crowd listened intently as Zora continued. "Through Coleman Coastal Development, I've been working to create inclusive spaces that serve entire communities, not just wealthy families. What we've heard today shows exactly why that work is so important." "She's just trying to profit from fake outrage," Beatrice interrupted desperately. "Mrs. Langford," Captain Pearson said sternly, "you need to stop interrupting witness testimony, or I'll have to separate you from this investigation." Zora smiled gently at the community members surrounding her. Environmental protection and social inclusion go hand in hand. When we exclude people from natural spaces, we're limiting education opportunities, family experiences, and community connections that make environmental stewardship possible. Rosa Delgado nodded enthusiastically. "That's exactly what we've been advocating for. Equal access to recreational spaces isn't just about fairness. It's about building communities where everyone has a stake in protecting our natural resources." Fiona O'Brien addressed Zora directly. "Ms. Coleman, if you're truly committed to inclusive access, how can the community be sure these policies will continue?" "Community oversight," Zora replied immediately. "Any development I manage includes community advisory boards with real decision-making power. Local business owners, residents, and advocacy groups will have permanent voices in how these spaces are managed." Officer Derek Hayes approached Captain Pearson quietly. "Based on this testimony, we have grounds for civil rights violation charges and filing false police reports." "I agree," Captain Pearson replied. "The systematic nature of this discrimination, combined with the false claims of legal authority, constitutes serious criminal behavior." Elliot Marsh had been broadcasting live coverage throughout the testimony, and viewer response was overwhelming. Comments poured in from community members, sharing their own experiences with discrimination at local beaches and recreational areas. Calvin Brooks approached Zora Coleman hesitantly. "Ms. Coleman, I know I participated in enforcing discriminatory policies. If there's any way I can help make this right, I want to do whatever's necessary." "Accountability and change," Zora replied. Understanding how systematic exclusion harms communities is the first step toward building inclusive spaces that serve everyone. Bradley Langford finished his phone conversation with their attorney and approached Captain Pearson with obvious anxiety. Our legal counsel advises complete cooperation with your investigation. We want to resolve this matter appropriately. Beatrice Langford stared at her husband in shock. Bradley, you can't abandon our family like this. I'm trying to protect our family, Bradley replied quietly. The evidence is overwhelming, and continuing to deny reality will only make things worse. Marcus looked around at his peers, community members, and the documenting news crew with growing understanding of how serious this situation had become. His family's discriminatory behavior was now public knowledge, and the consequences would extend far beyond this beach confrontation. Captain Pearson closed her notepad and addressed the entire gathering. Based on the testimony we've collected today, we'll be filing formal charges related to civil rights violations and false reporting. This investigation will continue, and we'll be coordinating with federal authorities regarding systematic discrimination patterns. The community members who had provided testimony felt a sense of empowerment they hadn't experienced before. Their voices had been heard, their experiences validated, and systematic discrimination was finally facing official consequences. Rosa Delgado raised her voice to address the crowd. This is what community action looks like. When we stand together against injustice, when we document discrimination, when we support each other's right to equal access, we can create real change. The morning sun was now high overhead, casting everything in sharp, clear light that seemed to symbolize the transparency this confrontation had brought to long-hidden discriminatory practices. What had begun as one family's attempt to exclude Zora Coleman had revealed systematic exclusion affecting dozens of community members. Zora Coleman looked across the beach that would soon be transformed from an exclusive enclave into an inclusive community space. The testimony had revealed not just individual prejudice, but institutional discrimination that required systematic change. As Elliot Marsh concluded his live broadcast, viewers throughout the region were already sharing the story and discussing their own experiences with discriminatory treatment at recreational facilities. The community testimony had created momentum that would extend far beyond this particular beach. The Langford family faced a new reality where their assumed authority had been exposed as systematic discrimination. Their legal claims had been proven false, and their social standing was crumbling under the weight of documented civil rights violations. Community members began to disperse, but the solidarity created through shared testimony would continue. They had discovered their collective power to challenge discrimination and demand equal access to public spaces. Captain Pearson and Officer Derek Hayes prepared to continue their investigation, knowing that this case would likely become a model for addressing systematic discrimination in recreational areas throughout the region. The morning's events had transformed an individual property dispute into a community reckoning with systematic exclusion and a collective commitment to inclusive access for all families seeking to enjoy the natural beauty of the coast. The morning sun cast sharp shadows across the sand as Captain Louise Pearson pulled out her official documentation tablet. Her blue long-sleeve uniform crisp despite the coastal humidity. The crowd of witnesses had grown larger, forming a semicircle around the unfolding confrontation that would soon become a turning point in the community's fight against systematic discrimination. Mrs. Langford. Captain Pearson's voice carried the weight of official authority as she addressed Beatrice, whose red designer beachwear now seemed garishly inappropriate against the serious legal proceedings beginning to unfold. Based on the evidence presented and multiple witness testimonies, I'm formally documenting civil rights violations under federal statute. You've made discriminatory statements based on race, filed a false police report, and attempted to use law enforcement to harass a property owner exercising her legal rights. Beatrice's face flushed crimson, clashing violently with her red sun hat as she sputtered in disbelief. This is absolutely ridiculous. I demand to speak with your superior immediately. Do you have any idea who my husband knows? The political connections we have? Elliot Marsh adjusted his green shirt and blue jacket as he positioned himself for optimal camera coverage, his professional instincts recognizing the historic nature of what was unfolding. His live broadcast was already generating thousands of viewers as word spread through social media about the confrontation that was exposing decades of coastal discrimination. Captain, this is Elliot Marsh from Channel 7 News. Can you confirm that formal charges are being filed against the Langford family? His microphone captured every word as Captain Pearson nodded grimly. Multiple charges are being processed. Civil rights violations, filing false police reports, harassment, and potentially conspiracy to deny equal access to public accommodations. The evidence is overwhelming and well documented. Natalie Foster stepped forward, her orange blazer and blue skirt professional and authoritative as she carried a leather portfolio containing the legal documents that would seal the Langford family's fate. Her voice was calm but firm as she addressed the family directly. I'm serving formal notice of lease termination effective immediately. Your family's access to this beachfront property was contingent upon compliance with non-discrimination clauses that you've repeatedly violated. Additionally, you're being served with trespassing warnings. Any future presence on Coleman Coastal Development property without written permission will result in immediate arrest. Bradley Langford's orange polo shirt was now soaked with perspiration as the magnitude of their legal jeopardy became clear. His khaki shorts wrinkled as he shifted nervously, pulling out his phone with shaking hands. I need to call our attorney immediately. This has gotten completely out of hand. His conversation was brief and clearly devastating. The family attorney's voice could be heard through the phone, sharp and urgent, advising immediate cessation of any confrontational behavior and recommending settlement negotiations to avoid criminal prosecution. Judge Carolyn Bennett's voice crackled through Captain Pearson's radio communication system, her authority unmistakable even through the static. Captain Pearson, I've reviewed the preliminary documentation transmitted to my office. Ms. Coleman's legal standing is absolutely clear. She has full authority to enforce property rights, and the Langford family's behavior constitutes multiple criminal violations. You're authorized to proceed with immediate enforcement of all property rights and criminal charges. Marcus Langford frantically worked his phone, desperately trying to delete the social media content he'd posted earlier. But the damage was already done. His entitled behavior had been captured and shared across multiple platforms, generating outrage and becoming a viral example of privileged racism in action. Oh God, it's everywhere, Marcus muttered, his face pale as he scrolled through comment after comment condemning his family's behavior. Mom, everyone's sharing it. My friends, my school, everyone's seeing this. Rosa Delgado stepped forward, her red jacket bright against the coastal backdrop, her voice carrying the strength of community organizing and years of fighting systematic discrimination. This moment represents more than just one family's accountability. This is about transforming a system that has excluded our community for decades. She gestured toward the growing crowd of supporters, many wearing red clothing in solidarity, their faces reflecting determination and hope. We're coordinating immediate community response to ensure ongoing oversight of inclusive access policies. No more backdoor deals. No more discriminatory enforcement. No more exclusion based on race or economic status. Fiona O'Brien nodded vigorously, her red restaurant uniform marking her as a local business owner who had witnessed the Langford family's discriminatory behavior for years. Rosa's right. We're forming a community oversight committee to monitor access policies and document any future discrimination attempts. This stops today. Calvin Brooks stood apart from the crowd, his security uniform wrinkled and his face reflecting the shame of having participated in discriminatory enforcement policies. His employment badge felt heavy in his pocket as he realized his job was likely forfeit. Captain Pearson addressed him directly. "Mr. Brooks, your cooperation with discriminatory policies, even under employer pressure, has contributed to civil rights violations. I strongly recommend full cooperation with our investigation if you want to avoid criminal charges yourself." Calvin nodded miserably, his voice barely audible. "I knew it was wrong. I knew they didn't have real legal authority, but the resort management insisted I support their claims. I need this job to support my family, but I never should have gone along with it." Officer Derek Hayes approached with his documentation tablet, his blue short-sleeve uniform properly pressed despite the morning's intense confrontation. "Captain, I've processed formal complaints from 17 different community members about the Langford family's historical behavior. The pattern of discrimination is extensive and well documented." He scrolled through his digital notes, reading from multiple witness statements. Harassment of Latino construction workers, exclusion of Black families from beach access, threats against local business owners who serve diverse clientele, and consistent use of false authority claims to intimidate community members. Beatrice Langford's voice rose to a near shriek, her composure completely shattered as the legal walls closed around her family. "This is a conspiracy. You're all working together to destroy us. We've been pillars of this community for years." Zora Coleman stepped forward, her red sundress and denim shorts a stark contrast to Beatrice's increasingly frantic designer beachwear. Her voice remained calm and measured, carrying the authority of someone who had built her success through merit and legal expertise. "Mrs. Langford, your family has been pillars of exclusion and discrimination, not community leadership. Today marks the beginning of real community values, taking precedence over privilege and prejudice." She addressed the crowd directly, her voice carrying across the beach and being broadcast live through Elliott's news coverage. "I'm announcing immediate policy changes for all Coleman coastal development properties, equal beach access for all community members, environmental education programs for local schools, and partnerships with local businesses to ensure economic benefits reach everyone in this community." The crowd erupted in applause as Zora continued. "These changes aren't temporary responses to today's confrontation. They're permanent policies backed by legal documentation and community oversight to ensure they can never be reversed." Natalie Foster consulted her tablet, then addressed Captain Pearson. "Captain, we have additional documentation showing the Langford family's lease contained specific non-discrimination clauses that were repeatedly violated. Their termination is not only legal but required under the contract terms they signed." Bradley Langford made one last desperate attempt at negotiation, his voice cracking with stress. "Ms. Coleman, surely we can work something out. Our family has invested significant money in this community. Perhaps we could discuss lease renewal terms that address your concerns." Beatrice whirled on her husband, her anger now directed at his attempt at conciliation. "Bradley, stop groveling. We don't negotiate with people like her. Our attorney will fight this in court, and we'll get everything back plus damages for this harassment." Captain Pearson stepped between the arguing couple, her authority cutting through their domestic dispute. "Mrs. Langford, I strongly advise you to stop making statements that could be used as evidence of your discriminatory attitudes. Everything you say is being recorded and documented for legal proceedings." Elliot Marsh addressed his camera directly, his professional demeanor unable to hide his excitement about the story's significance. "What we're witnessing here represents a historic moment in coastal access rights and civil rights enforcement. The Langford family's decades of discriminatory behavior is finally facing comprehensive legal consequences." Rosa Delgado gathered the community supporters, her organizing experience evident as she coordinated their response. "We need witnesses to provide formal statements to Captain Pearson. Everyone who has experienced or witnessed discrimination by this family needs to be heard officially." A line of community members formed, each person representing years of excluded voices, finally getting official recognition. Their stories painted a comprehensive picture of systematic discrimination that had infected the entire coastal access system. Fiona O'Brien addressed Zora directly, her voice filled with gratitude and determination. "Ms. Coleman, the business community is ready to support these changes fully. We've lost customers for years because of their exclusionary practices. Inclusive access will benefit everyone economically and socially." Marcus Langford sat heavily on a piece of driftwood, his phone silent as the social media consequences of his family's behavior continued to multiply. His privileged worldview was crumbling as he faced the reality that his actions had consequences beyond his family's protective bubble. Captain Pearson addressed the assembled crowd with official finality. "Legal proceedings begin immediately. The Langford family will face criminal charges, civil rights violations, and potential federal investigation depending on the scope of discriminatory practices uncovered during our investigation." She turned to Zora Coleman with professional respect. "Ms. Coleman, your property rights are fully recognized and enforceable immediately. Any interference with your management decisions or harassment of you or your tenants should be reported directly to my office." Natalie Foster handed Captain Pearson a thick folder of additional documentation. "Captain, this contains contracts, communications, and witness statements spanning the last 5 years. The pattern of discrimination is extensive and clearly documented." As the morning sun climbed higher, the beach that had been a symbol of exclusion was already beginning its transformation into a symbol of justice and community empowerment. The Langford family's reign of discriminatory control was ending not with private negotiation or quiet settlement, but with public accountability and systematic change. Beatrice Langford's final words carried the bitter resentment of privilege confronting consequences. "This isn't over. We have resources and connections you can't imagine. We'll fight this through every court in the state." Zora Coleman's response was measured and confident, backed by legal authority and community support. "Mrs. Langford, your resources were built on exclusion and discrimination. Our community's resources are built on justice and equality. I'm confident about which foundation will prove stronger in court." The legal consequences were just beginning, but the transformation of power dynamics was already complete and irreversible. 3 days after the confrontation that exposed the Langford family's discriminatory practices, Zora Coleman stood at the entrance of what had once been an exclusive beach access point, watching as construction crews removed the pretentious private property members-only signs that had barred community access for years. The morning sun cast brilliant light across the pristine coastline as workers in orange safety vests and blue work pants dismantled the barriers that had symbolized decades of exclusion. Natalie Foster, wearing her signature orange blazer and blue skirt, coordinated with the crew leaders while documenting every step of the transformation process. "The new signage should be installed by noon," Natalie reported, consulting her tablet as she approached Zora. "Community Access Beach, welcome to Coleman Coastal Community Foundation, equal access for all families. The Environmental Education Center groundbreaking is scheduled for next week." Zora nodded, her red sundress and denim shorts catching the ocean breeze as she surveyed the bustling activity. Local families had already begun arriving, some hesitant after years of being turned away, others boldly claiming their rightful place on the public coastline. Children ran across the sand while parents set up beach umbrellas, their laughter replacing the tense silence that had characterized this space under the Langford family's discriminatory control. Fiona O'Brien emerged from her beachfront restaurant, wearing her red uniform top and black pants, carrying a clipboard filled with signatures from local business owners. Her face glowed with satisfaction as she joined Zora and Natalie near the construction area. "Every restaurant and shop owner on the Strip has signed the Community Oversight Agreement," she announced. "We're committed to ensuring equal service and welcoming treatment for all beachgoers, regardless of background or appearance." The transformation extended beyond mere policy changes. Rosa Delgado, had organized a community celebration that doubled as an advocacy training session, teaching local residents about their rights to equal access in public spaces. Wearing her red activist jacket over blue jeans, Rosa addressed a growing crowd of community members, her voice carrying across the beach with passionate conviction. "This victory represents more than one family being held accountable," Rosa declared, gesturing toward the diverse crowd of families enjoying the beach. "This is proof that when communities unite against systematic discrimination, we can create lasting change that serves everyone equally." Elliot Marsh, the local news reporter in his green shirt and blue jacket, conducted interviews with beachgoers while his camera crew documented the dramatic transformation. His coverage had generated regional and national attention to coastal access rights, inspiring similar advocacy efforts in exclusive developments throughout the state. "What we're witnessing here goes beyond local property disputes," Elliot explained to his television audience. "The Coleman coastal case has become a model for addressing discriminatory practices in recreational spaces nationwide. Legal experts are calling it a watershed moment for equal access rights." The institutional changes extended to law enforcement protocols as well. Captain Louise Pearson, wearing her blue long-sleeve uniform, had worked with Officer Derek Hayes to implement comprehensive new procedures for responding to property disputes and potential civil rights violations. Their revised training emphasized community-centered policing and thorough investigation of discrimination complaints. "We've established mandatory protocols requiring verification of legal authority before enforcing exclusion claims," Captain Pearson explained to a gathering of community leaders. "Officers must now document any discriminatory language or behavior and investigate patterns of bias in access disputes." Officer Derek Hayes, in his regulation blue short-sleeve uniform, had become an advocate for the new procedures after witnessing how close the situation had come to resulting in wrongful arrest. "The Langford case taught us that wealth and privilege don't determine legal authority," he reflected. "Our job is protecting everyone's rights equally, not enforcing assumed hierarchies." Meanwhile, the Langford family faced the full consequences of their discriminatory behavior and false claims of authority. Beatrice Langford encountered formal legal proceedings for civil rights violations, while the family's eviction from their beachfront property proceeded through the courts. Their attempts to negotiate lease renewal had failed completely after Judge Carolyn Bennett, wearing her blue judicial robes, ruled that their pattern of discriminatory behavior violated basic tenancy agreements. Calvin Brooks experienced a remarkable personal transformation through his employment with Zora Coleman's development company. After years of being pressured to enforce discriminatory policies, he now worked under guidelines promoting dignity and equal treatment for all visitors. Wearing his new green security uniform and blue cap, Calvin helped implement inclusive access policies while maintaining environmental protections. "Working for Coleman Coastal Development has restored my faith in security work," Calvin shared with community members. "Instead of excluding people, I'm helping ensure everyone feels welcome and safe. It's the job I always wanted security work to be." Marcus Langford began community service, addressing the impact of discriminatory behavior on local communities. Working directly with families his family had previously harassed and excluded, the entitled teenager, who had filmed the confrontation for social media entertainment, now spent his afternoons helping maintain beach cleanup efforts and learning about the harm caused by systematic exclusion. Judge Carolyn Bennett had commended the community response and legal resolution as a model for addressing systemic discrimination in recreational spaces. During a public ceremony, she praised the collaborative approach that had transformed individual confrontation into comprehensive institutional change. The Coleman coastal case demonstrates how legal action combined with community organization can address not just individual incidents of discrimination, but the systematic practices that enable such behavior, Judge Bennett observed. "This represents justice creating positive change rather than mere punishment." The centerpiece of the transformation was Zora Coleman's establishment of the Coleman Coastal Community Foundation, ensuring long-term inclusive access and environmental protection through community ownership and oversight. The Foundation's charter guaranteed that the coastal area would remain accessible to families of all backgrounds while maintaining the highest environmental standards. Natalie Foster had designed comprehensive programs addressing both immediate access needs and long-term environmental education. The Foundation's initiatives included family beach programs, marine conservation education, and community leadership development, focused on advocacy and equal rights. Environmental protection and social justice aren't separate issues, Zora explained to Foundation board members. Exclusive access policies often prevent communities from developing the connection to natural spaces that inspires environmental stewardship. Inclusive access creates better environmental protection through broader community investment. Local business owners reported significant increases in diverse clientele as families previously excluded by discriminatory practices began frequenting beachfront establishments. Fiona O'Brien's restaurant had become a community gathering space where families shared meals while planning advocacy efforts and celebrating their reclaimed access rights. The transformation attracted attention from coastal communities throughout the region, with community organizers visiting to learn about the successful strategy for challenging exclusive development practices. Rosa Delgado had expanded her advocacy work to address discrimination in recreational spaces across multiple counties, using the Coleman coastal victory as proof that systematic change was achievable. Environmental education programs had exceeded all expectations, with families eagerly participating in marine conservation activities and beach restoration projects. Children who had never been allowed on the beach now led their parents in collecting data about local wildlife and participating in habitat protection efforts. The construction of permanent facilities progressed rapidly, with the Environmental Education Center designed to serve as both learning space and community meeting venue. Solar-powered buildings with natural lighting would provide year-round programming while maintaining the area's natural beauty and ecological integrity. As the sun reached its zenith, casting brilliant light across the transformed coastline, Zora Coleman reflected on the comprehensive change that had emerged from a single confrontation. What had begun as Beatrice Langford's racist assumptions and entitled demands for exclusion had catalyzed systematic transformation, touching every aspect of the community. The beach now bustled with diverse families building sandcastles, playing volleyball, and participating in environmental education activities. Parents who had never felt welcome in exclusive spaces now watched their children explore tide pools and learn about marine conservation from expert educators. This is what justice looks like, Zora observed, watching a group of children from various backgrounds work together on a beach cleanup project. Not just individual accountability, but systematic change that creates opportunity and dignity for everyone. The Coleman Coastal Community Foundation had established permanent funding for inclusive access programs, environmental protection, and ongoing advocacy training. Community members had developed leadership skills through organizing efforts, creating a sustainable foundation for continued progress in addressing discrimination. As evening approached, families gathered for the first official community celebration on the transformed beach. Rosa Delgado led collective singing, while Fiona O'Brien coordinated a community feast featuring dishes from the diverse families who now called the coastline their own. Captain Louise Pearson and Officer Derek Hayes participated in the celebration, their presence symbolizing the institutional changes that had emerged from community advocacy and legal action. Their revised protocols had already prevented similar incidents in neighboring jurisdictions, proving that systematic change could extend far beyond individual cases. The transformation was complete, but the work continued. Zora Coleman's vision of inclusive coastal development had created a model for communities nationwide, proving that confronting discrimination could generate positive change benefiting everyone. Environmental protection flourished through broader community engagement, while equal access policies ensured that natural beauty remained available to all families regardless of background or economic status. As stars emerged overhead and families packed up their beach gear, children made plans for tomorrow's return to their reclaimed coastline. The systematic transformation from exclusionary space to community asset had created something more valuable than private privilege, a shared investment in environmental protection and social justice that would benefit generations of families to come. 6 months had transformed everything. The morning sun cast golden light across the pristine coastline, where children's laughter now echoed freely across sand that had once been forbidden territory. Families of every background spread colorful blankets beneath swaying palm trees, their joy a living testament to what justice could accomplish when communities refused to accept discrimination as normal. Zora Coleman stood on the newly constructed observation deck, watching a group of children build sandcastles while their parents relaxed nearby. She wore a flowing red sundress and comfortable denim shorts, the same outfit she'd chosen on that pivotal day when Beatrice Langford had tried to claim ownership over public beauty. The memory felt distant now, like watching someone else's story unfold. Yet the transformation it had sparked continued expanding beyond anything she'd initially imagined. The Coleman Coastal Community Foundation had grown into something magnificent. What began as a single confrontation over beach access had evolved into a comprehensive program addressing environmental education, community empowerment, and equal access rights throughout the entire coastal region. The foundation's headquarters occupied the former exclusive clubhouse, its walls now displaying artwork from local students and community members celebrating their shared coastal heritage. Natalie Foster approached from the foundation offices, wearing her signature orange blazer and blue skirt, carrying a tablet filled with the day's promising updates. Her role had expanded far beyond assistant work into program management for initiatives that were changing lives across multiple communities. The foundation now operated environmental education centers, legal advocacy programs, and community development projects that ensured formally exclusive spaces served everyone equally. "The morning report shows incredible progress," Natalie announced, her voice filled with genuine excitement. 3 more coastal communities have requested our assistance in challenging discriminatory access policies. The legal precedent we established here is creating ripple effects throughout the entire state. Zora Coleman smiled, remembering how isolated and targeted she'd felt during those initial moments of confrontation. Now their victory had become a model for communities everywhere facing similar struggles against entrenched discrimination. The foundation's legal team worked with community advocates to challenge exclusionary practices while providing resources for sustainable development that protected both environmental integrity and equal access rights. Down at the beach, Fiona O'Brien was setting up her mobile food service, wearing her red uniform as she arranged fresh fruit and sustainable seafood options. Her restaurant had thrived beyond expectations once diverse families gained access to the coastal area. The partnership between her establishment and the foundation had created environmental education programs that taught visitors about ocean conservation while providing economic opportunities for local business owners. "Business has never been better," Fiona had told Zora Coleman during their recent planning meeting. "When you remove barriers that exclude people, everyone benefits." The community support has been overwhelming, and visitors appreciate learning about sustainable fishing practices while enjoying fresh, locally sourced meals. The environmental education programs had become particularly successful. Marine biologists worked with local educators to provide hands-on learning experiences that taught children about coastal ecosystems, climate change impacts, and conservation strategies. Former exclusive spaces now served as outdoor classrooms where young people from all backgrounds learned to become environmental stewards for their community's natural resources. Rosa Delgado had transformed her advocacy work into something even more powerful. Her red jacket had become a symbol of community organizing as she led efforts to address discriminatory practices in recreational spaces throughout the region. The success of their coastal access victory had inspired similar challenges to exclusionary policies at parks, recreational facilities, and public spaces that had historically served only privileged populations. What we accomplished here proved that communities have the power to challenge systemic discrimination when they unite around shared values. Rosa explained during a recent foundation meeting, "We've helped 12 communities successfully challenge exclusionary practices, and the legal precedents keep strengthening our ability to ensure equal access rights." Captain Louise Pearson had implemented comprehensive changes within the police department that extended far beyond their initial response training. Officers now received extensive education about civil rights enforcement, community-centered policing strategies, and the legal complexities surrounding property disputes in diverse communities. The training programs had become a model for other departments facing similar challenges with discriminatory enforcement practices. Officer Derek Hayes had embraced his role in developing these new protocols. His experience with the Langford family confrontation had taught him valuable lessons about the importance of thorough investigation before making assumptions based on wealth or social status. He now trained other officers to recognize potential civil rights violations and respond appropriately to discrimination complaints. The training has changed how we approach property disputes and access rights conflicts, Derek explained during a recent community meeting. "We've learned to investigate claims thoroughly rather than accepting assumptions about who belongs in particular spaces. The community trust we've built through this process has improved our ability to serve everyone fairly." Calvin Brooks had found his calling working with Coleman Coastal Development. His green maintenance uniform represented a complete transformation from his previous role enforcing discriminatory policies. Now he helped maintain inclusive access while protecting environmental resources, ensuring that increased community use didn't compromise the ecological integrity that made the coastal area so special. His work included managing sustainable visitor programs, coordinating with environmental educators, and maintaining facilities that served families from all backgrounds equally. The position had taught him valuable lessons about the difference between genuine security concerns and discriminatory exclusion policies disguised as property protection. "Working for Mrs. Coleman's company has shown me what ethical employment looks like," Calvin had shared during a foundation appreciation event. "Instead of excluding people based on assumptions and prejudice, we focus on protecting natural resources while ensuring everyone can enjoy these beautiful spaces safely." Marcus Langford had completed extensive community service programs that fundamentally changed his understanding of privilege, discrimination, and social responsibility. His work with environmental education programs and community outreach initiatives had provided genuine insight into the impact of discriminatory behavior on individuals and communities. The teenager who had once filmed confrontations for social media entertainment now volunteered with programs teaching young people about civil rights history, environmental stewardship, and community building. His transformation demonstrated that education and accountability could create genuine change even among those who had previously participated in discriminatory behavior. "I learned that my actions had real consequences for people who deserved equal access to public spaces," Marcus explained during a recent program presentation. "Understanding the history of discrimination and working directly with affected communities taught me lessons I never could have learned otherwise." Elliot Marsh continued reporting on the lasting impact of community action in challenging systemic exclusion throughout the region. His green shirt and blue jacket had become familiar sights at community events and policy meetings, where the Foundation's work influenced broader discussions about equal access rights and environmental protection. His investigative reporting had uncovered similar discriminatory practices at recreational facilities throughout the state, leading to legal challenges and policy changes that expanded beyond coastal access to address exclusion in parks, community centers, and other public spaces that had historically served only privileged populations. The story that began with one woman's courage to stand against discrimination has become a movement that's changing how we think about public space access rights. Elliott reported during his recent television special, "The legal precedents and community organizing strategies developed here are being replicated in communities nationwide." The former Langford beachfront property had been transformed into the Foundation's flagship environmental education center. Interactive exhibits taught visitors about marine ecosystems, climate change impacts, and conservation strategies while providing meeting spaces for community organizations and advocacy groups working on related issues throughout the region. Bradley Langford had relocated to another state, seeking to avoid the ongoing community consequences of his family's discriminatory behavior. His departure had been quiet, lacking the dramatic confrontation that had characterized his wife's approach to conflict resolution. The family's former influence in local business and social circles had evaporated once their pattern of discrimination became public knowledge. Beatrice Langford continued facing legal consequences for civil rights violations and filing false police reports. Her attempts to maintain social status and influence had failed completely as community members and former associates distanced themselves from her discriminatory behavior. The legal proceedings served as a reminder that privilege and wealth could not protect individuals from accountability for violating others' civil rights. The transformation extended beyond individual consequences to systematic institutional changes. Local businesses had adopted inclusive access policies, recreational facilities had removed discriminatory barriers, and community organizations had developed oversight mechanisms to prevent future exclusionary practices from taking hold in public spaces. Judge Carolyn Bennett had commended the community response and legal resolution as a model for addressing systemic discrimination in her blue jacket during the recent legal education conference. The case had become required reading in civil rights law courses and community organizing programs throughout the region. This case demonstrates how individual courage, combined with community solidarity, can create lasting institutional change. Judge Bennett had explained during her presentation, "The legal precedents established here continue influencing decisions about equal access rights and civil rights enforcement in communities nationwide." As afternoon sunlight painted the beach in warm golden hues, Zora Coleman walked along the shoreline where diverse families continued enjoying the space that had once been claimed as private territory by people who had never owned it. Children played together across lines that discrimination had once tried to draw, their parents sharing conversations about community building, environmental protection, and the ongoing work of ensuring equal access rights. The Coleman Coastal Community Foundation's work had expanded to include legal advocacy, environmental education, community development, and civil rights training programs that served as resources for communities throughout the region facing similar challenges with discriminatory exclusion from public spaces and recreational facilities. Natalie Foster joined Zora Coleman for their regular evening walk, reviewing the Foundation's expanding impact on communities throughout the state. Their work had influenced policy changes, legal precedents, and community organizing strategies that continued creating positive transformation far beyond their original coastal community. "The ripple effects keep expanding," Natalie observed, as they watched families from all backgrounds enjoying equal access to pristine beaches and educational programs. What began as confrontation over beach access has become a movement that's changing how communities approach civil rights enforcement and inclusive development throughout the region. The Foundation's success had attracted national attention from civil rights organizations, environmental groups, and community development advocates interested in replicating their model of combining equal access advocacy with environmental protection and sustainable community development in other regions facing similar challenges. As evening approached, Zora Coleman reflected on the transformation from individual confrontation to systematic change. The woman who had been told she didn't belong in a public space had created lasting institutions, ensuring that no one would face similar discrimination in their community again. The beach, that had once symbolized exclusion and privilege, now represented the power of justice, community solidarity, and persistent advocacy to overcome entrenched discrimination and create positive change that served everyone equally, while protecting the natural resources that belonged to all people. Children's laughter echoed across the sand as families from all backgrounds packed up their belongings, planning return visits to a space that welcomed them completely. The transformation proved that individual courage, combined with community action, could challenge systematic discrimination and create lasting institutional change that served justice rather than privilege. Standing on the beach where Beatrice Langford had once tried to claim false authority, Zora Coleman smiled at the complete transformation of a space that now served its true purpose as a community asset, belonging to everyone equally. The confrontation that had begun with discrimination and exclusion had evolved into a movement creating lasting positive change throughout their region and beyond. The sun set over waves that touched shores now open to all people, carrying the light of justice toward communities still fighting for equal access rights. Their victory had become a beacon, proving that systematic change remained possible when individuals refused to accept discrimination as normal and communities united around shared values of equality, environmental protection, and social justice. You just heard a story that history tried to overlook. If it stayed with you, take a second to stand with it. Subscribe, share, and help us keep telling the stories that deserve light, not silence.